He was known around town as Blade, a rugged Hell's Angels biker with a face weathered by years of hard roads and bad luck. His leather jacket was torn, his boots caked with dust, and his stomach had been empty for 2 days. On a cold gray morning, he pulled into a quiet village, just a hungry man on an old Harley, trying to find something warm to eat. But what started as a search for food would turn into something that changed his life forever. That morning, as his engine rattled to a stop outside a rundown cottage at the edge of town, Blade noticed an elderly woman standing on a shaky stool, trying to fix her leaking roof with trembling hands. Her hair was silver and messy, her clothes worn thin from years of use, and her face held the soft sadness of someone who had been forgotten by the world. The sound of hammering echoed weakly in the cold air. He watched for a moment, hesitating. She looked fragile, too fragile to be climbing up there. But when the stool beneath her started to wobble, Blade instinctively ran forward, catching her just before she fell. She gasped in shock, looking up into the eyes of the burly biker who had saved her from crashing to the ground. "Careful, lady," he said, steadying her with one hand. "You tryin' to break your neck?" She blinked, startled but grateful. "Roof's been leaking for weeks," she said softly, her voice tired. "Can't afford anyone to fix it." Blade looked at the sagging roof, then at the old woman shaking hands. His stomach growled, reminding him why he'd stopped in the first place. "Tell you what," he said after a moment, scratching the back of his neck. "I'll fix your roof if you've got something to eat. Deal?" Her lips curved into a faint smile. "I've got soup on the stove. It's not much, but it's warm." That was enough. Blade spent the next hours climbing up onto the roof, hammering away in the cold while the smell of homemade vegetable soup drifted from the kitchen window. He wasn't a professional builder, but he'd spent enough years fixing bikes and busted engines to figure it out. Each thud of the hammer echoed like a heartbeat, steady and strong, something he hadn't felt in a long time. When he climbed down, his hands covered in grime, the old woman was waiting with a bowl of soup and a small loaf of bread. He sat on the porch, eating like a man who hadn't seen food in days. She sat beside him, quietly watching him eat, her eyes softening. "You remind me of my son," she said suddenly. "He was about your age when he left. Haven't heard from him in 15 years. Blade froze for a moment, a spoon halfway to his mouth. "Sorry to hear that," he muttered. "He used to ride a motorcycle, too," she continued, her gaze drifting toward the horizon. "I always worried he'd crash, or worse. But the worst part was not knowing where he was, or if he's even alive." For the first time in years, Blade didn't know what to say. There was something in her tone, loss, hope, and love all tangled together, that hit deeper than he expected. He cleared his throat and looked away, pretending the wind stung his eyes. Over the next few days, he stayed. He replaced broken shingles, fixed the gutters, even repaired the creaky front steps. The old woman, her name was Martha, insisted on feeding him after every job. She told him stories about her late husband, her garden that once bloomed bright every spring, and the son she never stopped praying for. Blade listened more than he talked. Each story she told seemed to stitch something back together inside him, a part he didn't realize was broken. When the roof was finally done, Martha insisted on paying him. She pulled out a wrinkled envelope from a drawer and tried to hand him a few small bills. Blade shook his head. "Keep it," he said. "You need it more than I do." She frowned. "Then at least stay for dinner tonight. I made pie." He smiled, a rare, soft smile that surprised even him. "All right. Can't say no to pie." That evening, as the two of them sat by the fire, sharing stories and laughter, Blade felt something strange, peace. The world outside might have seen him as just a rough biker, but in that little house, with that kind old woman, he felt human again. The next morning, before the sun rose, he packed his things. He didn't want to wake her, but he left a note on the kitchen table. It said, "A thanks for the roof over my head and the warmth in my heart. You fed more than my stomach, old lady, you fed my soul." He rode off quietly, his motorcycle roaring down the empty road. Days passed. Then weeks. Martha went back to her quiet routine, missing the unexpected company she'd had. But one morning, a large envelope arrived in the mail. Inside was a letter, written in the same rough handwriting she recognized, and a check. A very large one. The letter read, "Martha, you probably figured it out by now. I wasn't just some hungry biker. My real name's Jake Lawson. Used to run with some rough people, but I've been trying to get my life right. I found a job with a construction crew, and I've been saving up. You treated me like family when no one else would. You reminded me that kindness still exists. So I wanted to return the favor. The check should cover the rest of your repairs, and maybe that garden you talked about, Jake, or Blade, if you prefer. Tears filled her eyes as she read. But what truly melted her heart wasn't the money, it was the note scribbled at the bottom. P.S. I found my mom. Turns out she never stopped praying for me. You were right, mothers never do. That night, as the stars blinked over her fixed roof and the wind whispered through the trees, Martha smiled. Somewhere out there, on a long, open road, a biker rode with a full heart for the first time in years, and that's the thing about kindness, it travels farther than the longest highway, and it never runs out of gas. He hadn't planned on ever coming back. The open road had always been Jake Lawson's, or Blade's, as everyone called him, escape, his running place. But 2 months after he'd left Martha's little cottage, he found himself haunted by her gentle voice and the look in her eyes when she said, "You remind me of my son." He couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, fate had sent him there for a reason. Life had started to turn around for him since then. He'd gotten steady work with a small-town construction crew that didn't care much about his past, only that he showed up and worked hard. For the first time in years, he was sober, stable, and starting to save money. Every day he passed homes with families eating dinner together or kids riding bikes down the street, and each time, his thoughts drifted back to that lonely old woman who'd given him soup, kindness, and something he hadn't felt in a long time, worth.